When I moved into Stonebrook Estates, all I wanted was peace. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind earned after 20 years in construction. Peace of mind, space to breathe, and a little land to call my own. I found it in a corner, lot with a wide backyard and an old drainage ditch that curved like a scar through the soil. That ditch, according to the original survey, was a natural runoff channel. It cut through my property, down the hill, and out past the subdivision, quietly doing its job every time it rained. I didn't give it much thought until Karen Whitmore knocked on my door. She wore her authority like perfume, overpowering, artificial, and lingering long after she left. President of the HOA for the past 6 years, Karen ran the neighborhood like a suburban monarchy. Her lawn was symmetrical, her shutters repainted every spring, and her clipboard always in hand. She didn't introduce herself as a neighbor. She introduced herself as enforcement. "Your trench," she said, before I could offer her a greeting, "does not meet community standards. It's exposed, unpleasant, a hazard." I blinked. "It's a drainage ditch." She frowned, as though I'd said something vulgar. "It's unsightly and unapproved. If you don't cover it or pipe it underground, you'll be cited for a violation." I should have closed the door right then. Instead, I tried logic. That ditch manages runoff from every lot up the slope. If I cover it, the water's got nowhere to go. Karen's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. "Then perhaps you should have chosen a property that didn't rely on outdated infrastructure." She handed me a bright pink slip, my first HOA violation, and walked off without another word. Over the next few days, I did my homework. I pulled up land surveys, reviewed municipal drainage maps, even called the county engineer's office. Everything confirmed what I already knew. The ditch was legally protected as a runoff channel. It wasn't just a property feature, it was essential. I brought the documents to the next HOA meeting, confident I could reason with her. I forgot that reason wasn't part of Karen's rulebook. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a beige room filled with folding chairs and the smell of overbrewed coffee. Karen stood behind a podium, like a judge overseeing a trial. I stepped forward with my packet of evidence. "The ditch runs through my yard, but it serves the whole block. Covering it could cause serious drainage issues, especially during the summer storms." Karen didn't even glance at the papers. "We're here to discuss neighborhood standards, not ancient plumbing. Open trenches don't reflect the values of Stonebrook Estates. But it's not a trench, it's a drainage channel. Blocking it violates county code." A smattering of murmurs rose in the room. A few neighbors nodded. Karen's eyes narrowed. "Then perhaps we should involve the county. But until then, the board has voted. You have 30 days to make the necessary improvements, or face daily fines." Her voice was calm, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. I left the meeting without another word. The pink violation form still crumpled in my hand. The vote was a formality. Karen held sway over most of the board, neighbors too nervous or indifferent to oppose her. She'd built a culture of silent compliance, and I had just become the neighborhood pariah. That night, I walked the length of the ditch under the pale wash of moonlight. The grass was damp from a passing shower. I watched the water trickle past like it had for decades, tracing its time-worn path with purpose. I knew the land better than they did, and I knew one thing for certain. If Karen got her way, the water wouldn't just vanish, it would wait, and when the storms came, as they always did in July, it would find the path of least resistance. Downhill. Directly into her basement. I didn't want a war, but Karen had drawn the line, not in ink or ordnance, but in stone, gravel, and stubbornness. And so, the battle over the ditch began. One woman's obsession with appearances versus one man's understanding of how the earth works. She had her rules. I had the rain, and the rain never needed permission. By the second week of May, Karen had escalated from threats to action, without so much as a courtesy knock. I woke one morning to the sound of grinding metal and voices shouting over machinery. I threw on a shirt and stepped into the backyard and nearly lost it. A contractor's crew, hard hats gleaming in the sun, had started filling in the drainage ditch. No, 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 I muttered, jogging toward the fence. What the hell do you think you're doing? A guy with a cement-streaked vest looked up. Got a work order from the HOA. Said we're supposed to backfill and regrade. Whole length, top to bottom. I marched around to the front yard and nearly collided with Karen, who was standing like a sentry, with her arms crossed and a glint of smug satisfaction in her eyes. You hired contractors to dig on my property, without permission. Karen held up a laminated document, as though it were a holy relic. The HOA board voted to use discretionary funds for immediate remediation. Your failure to act forced our hand. You can't touch that ditch. It's not optional. It's a designated water channel. You're creating a hazard. Karen didn't flinch. You were given ample time. Your non-compliance gave us authority. Behind her, a small group of HOA loyalists hovered like vultures, nodding dutifully. I didn't see anyone holding a backbone. I called the sheriff. By the time they arrived, half the ditch was already filled with gravel and packed dirt. The deputy, a young guy named Ruiz, listened patiently as I explained, pointing to the boundary lines and drainage diagrams. Ruiz sighed. This is messy. You're right. If it's on your land and it's a designated runoff channel, they can't alter it without your permission or a court order. Karen's expression soured like milk in the sun. But, Ruiz added, if there's an active HOA vote and no formal injunction on file, it becomes a civil matter. You'll have to take it up with the county. I can't shut them down without a legal order. Karen turned to me with a smile as brittle as glass. Then I suppose you'd better get yourself a lawyer. The crew finished the job that evening, where once the earth dipped and flowed, now there was only a slightly raised stretch of compacted dirt and sod. Karen even added decorative stones along the edge, as if that made it all okay. I knew what would come next. The moment the rain returned, the water would have nowhere to go. It would back up, find the weakest point, and flood anything in its path. I tried to reason again. I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board, filed a code violation report with the county, and even offered to install a graded trench system that preserved both function and aesthetics. Karen rejected everything. It's been handled, she wrote in an email. Consider the matter closed. I wasn't the only one who noticed the consequences. 2 weeks later, after a moderate spring storm, 3 properties uphill from mine reported soggy lawns and rising puddles. The Reeds who lived behind me found their kids' playset sitting in a pool of stagnant water. Mr. Tran, 2 doors over, mentioned that his garage smelled like mildew, but no one dared confront Karen publicly. She'd weaponized her power too well, controlling pool access, issuing fines for trivial violations, even threatening to cancel the summer block party over a disputed banner size. She didn't run the HOA, she was the HOA. Still, I kept my head down. I documented everything: photos, timestamps, drainage flow reports. I logged rainfall totals and took videos when water started pooling in places it never had before. And then, on the second Saturday of June, the sky broke. Not a drizzle, a deluge. Thunder rattled windows, water hammered rooftops. Within an hour, Stonebrook's manicured lawns became miniature marshes. I stood on my back porch, watching the floodwater inch closer to the low ridge where the ditch used to be. With the channel filled, the water had nowhere to go, so it spread outward, slowly, steadily, in every direction, toward Karen's yard, toward her flower beds, toward the basement windows tucked just above the soil line, and I knew, without lifting a finger, that nature was about to teach Karen the lesson I never could. The rain would do what the bylaws never would: enforce reality. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the damage had already soaked deep into the bones of Stonebrook. I stepped outside just after sunrise. Mist clung to the grass like a warning. From the edge of my backyard, I followed the slight slope that now carried no water, only silence, and stared toward Karen Whitmore's house. Her tulip garden was drowned. Her pristine white trellis, once the pride of the HOA newsletter cover, leaned sideways like a casualty of war. But what drew my attention most was the gurgling sound of sump pumps, echoing from her basement vents. She'd been flooded. A full foot of water, I'd later learn, seeped into her lower level overnight. Ruined carpet, warped furniture, soaked, insulation, the whole 9 yards. But I didn't need the full report. Her face said enough when I saw her later that afternoon. She wore rain boots and a puffy jacket, but no amount of insulation could protect her from the chill of public embarrassment. For the first time since I'd moved in, Karen looked small. She spotted me by the sidewalk and stiffened, clearly debating whether to say something. "Morning," I said, my voice calm and deliberate. Her eyes narrowed. "You're enjoying this. I'm not," I replied honestly. "But I warned you this would happen. You blocked a natural runoff. That ditch wasn't cosmetic. It was functional." Karen didn't respond. Her jaw tightened, but no words came. She turned and disappeared inside, slamming the door hard enough to echo down the street. That night, the HOA message board erupted. Neighbors who had remained silent now had soggy basements, waterlogged flower beds, and flooded crawl spaces. Photos circulated of minor damages, floating mulch, ruined garden boxes, but also some serious concerns: warped garage walls, mold spots, and reports of insect swarms. Mr. Tran posted a blistering comment. "Our board made a unilateral decision to alter a functional drainage system without community input and against expert advice. Who's covering these damages?" Another neighbor chimed in. "This is what happens when rules are prioritized over reality. We need an emergency meeting." Within 24 hours, a meeting was scheduled. It was standing room only at the clubhouse. People brought folders, phone photos, even small jars of brown water as evidence. Karen tried to maintain control, but the crowd turned fast. "You forced changes without a vote. You ignored a legal drainage map. My whole laundry room's underwater." Karen raised her hands for quiet, but her usual air of dominance had evaporated. Her voice faltered under the pressure. "We were acting in the best interest of neighborhood standards." I stepped forward, not to attack, but to cut through the noise. I held up my file, the same one I'd offered weeks ago. "This is what." I showed the board before they filled the ditch. "These are county drainage maps, flood risk data, and runoff flow projections. I've worked on construction sites for 20 years. That ditch was never about appearances. It was about safety." Karen's eyes avoided mine. I continued. "You don't have to like how it looked, but pretending water follows rules, or HOA policies, that's fantasy. Water follows gravity." Silence followed. A few board members, those who'd always backed Karen without question, began flipping through the copies I passed around. That night, a vote was held. For the first time in 6 years, Karen was outvoted. A motion passed to dissolve the current board and hold emergency elections. Karen stood quietly, arms crossed, as the votes were tallied. No protests, no speeches, just a quiet exit. I left the meeting not gloating, but exhausted. There was nothing satisfying about a flooded basement. Even Karen didn't deserve that. Though she'd done everything possible to earn it, the next morning, I received a knock on the door. It wasn't angry or forceful, it was polite. Karen stood on my porch, this time without a clipboard, her makeup undone, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. I was wrong, she said plainly. I waited. That ditch. I didn't understand what it did. I thought you were being difficult. I nodded slowly. You weren't the first to underestimate it. I filed an insurance claim, she added. They denied it, called it negligence. I'm sorry to hear that. Karen glanced towards my backyard. If we dig it out again, could you help? I considered her words, not just the request, but the admission behind it. A small olive branch maybe, but a branch nonetheless. Yes, I said. But this time, we do it right. Her shoulders lowered, just a bit, as she nodded and turned away. The war was over, but the land still had one more message to deliver. The skies weren't finished yet. 3 days later, Karen showed up again, this time with gloves in her hand and dirt on her shoes. The morning sun peeked through a thin veil of clouds, casting a golden sheen over the soaked ground. The storm had passed, but its memory still lingered in the air, a quiet tension that clung to the roots of Stonebrook. Like a lesson half learned, we stood side by side at the back edge of my yard, where the ditch had once run clean and clear. Now it was a gnarled scar of muddy fill and collapsed turf. I brought shovels, Karen said, lifting the tools from the trunk of her SUV. I've got a backhoe coming, I replied, but we'll need handwork for the grading. She nodded, no longer pretending to be above the labor. Let's dig. As the machine roared to life and carved out the first section of the trench, neighbors started to gather, not to gawk. This wasn't spectacle anymore, but to help. Mr. Tran arrived with stakes and string. The Reeds brought donuts and coffee. Even 2 teenagers from the end of the street came to carry wheelbarrows of soil. For the first time since I'd moved into the neighborhood, Stonebrook felt like a community. Not a gated collection of manicured parcels, but something real. Karen didn't try to control it. She didn't bark orders or micromanage. She dug, hauled, wiped sweat from her brow, and quietly followed the markings I laid out for the runoff gradient. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. She wasn't just repairing a ditch. She was rebuilding trust, shovelful by shovelful. By late afternoon, the channel had begun to take shape, narrow and deep, with reinforced edges and a gravel base to prevent erosion. We lined the sides with mesh and fastened a small graded culvert pipe across the rear access path. It wasn't flashy, but it worked. You know, Karen said quietly, as we stood surveying the nearly finished trench. When I first joined the HOA, I thought it was about protecting the neighborhood. It can be, I said, but not when protection turns into control. She looked at me, eyes heavier now, but clearer. I forgot we all live here, not just me. A silence passed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Then she added, I rescinded all pending fines issued under my term, and I nominated Tran to head the new board. Unanimous vote. Smart move. I also recommended you for vice chair. That caught me off guard. Me? She gave a faint smile. You're the only one who stood your ground when it mattered, and you understood the land better than any of us. I looked out over the trench. Water still clung to the soil from the recent storm, but now it had a place to go. I'll think about it, I said. Fair enough. By the weekend, the drainage ditch was fully restored. Stronger, smarter, and better than before. The rains came again the following week, but this time, the runoff carved a clean, perfect line through the trench. No backups, no floods, just the land doing what it was meant to do. And something changed in Stonebrook. The HOA meetings were no longer packed with fear or dominated by a single voice. People came to listen, contribute, and ask questions. The board issued fewer citations and more reminders. Karen, once the queen of the bylaws, began leading neighborhood cleanups, not because she had to, but because she finally understood the value of working with the community instead of over it. As for me, I never sought power, but I accepted the vice chair role after a lot of persuasion, not to wield authority, but to keep it honest, to protect the commons, to speak up when others won't. And when spring came back around and the clouds gathered once again, I didn't feel dread. I felt prepared. Because the ditch was more than just a channel for runoff. It was a lesson in humility, in listening, in knowing when to dig in and when to let go. So when the next rain hit, heavy and relentless, I stood at my back porch and watched as the water flowed through the trench, curving and rushing toward its natural course, safely away from homes and basements, just as it was meant to. And somewhere down the road, Karen stood on her own porch, sipping coffee and watching that same stream, her gaze steady. We didn't wave. We didn't need to. We understood each other now. No bylaws required.